And hey, I'm not going to shy away from any difficult decisions. The reality is people's lives on the line. If we don't get this right, there's a crisis that brews over into conflict. We need to be ready.
We will measure our success not only by the battles we win, but also by the wars we end.
Right now, all eyes are on Washington. But who's actually watching Europe at the moment?
The deepening ties between China, Russia and North Korea would certainly have some in Washington concerned.
And then Daddy has to sometimes use strong language.
The IDF will continue to uphold the ceasefire agreement and will respond firmly to any violation of it.
I'm Venetia Rainey and this is Battle Lines. It's Friday, 12th of December, 2025. The world is watching Venezuela with bated breath after it accused the US of piracy for seizing one of its oil tankers in the Caribbean. Now look, this is likely to be a fast-moving situation, so we're not covering it on today's episode, particularly as we've covered the build-up extensively. If you want to understand the background to these tensions between Donald Trump and Nicolas Maduro, the Venezuelan leader, and crucially what could happen next if a conflict did erupt, then I really recommend going back to check out our previous episodes. We'll link to them in the show notes. But for today's episode, I want to bring you a really special interview with Carns, Britain's Minister of State for the Armed Forces, usually referred to as MINAF for short. Seen as a bit of a rising star within the British government, Colonel Alistair Scott Carns was in the Royal Marines for decades before joining Labour and becoming an MP for the first time last year. He sat down this week with our Associate Defence Editor and Ukraine the Latest host, Dom Nicholls. It's a fascinating and wide-ranging chat covering Europe's commitment to defending Ukraine, reforms Russia links, Ajax, the inquiry into the British Special Forces in Afghanistan, and much, much more. Before you hear the interview, I just want to bring in Dom. Dom, tell me a bit more about Carns' background and why he's seen as one to watch in the British defence world.
Well, hi, Venetia. So Carns, Royal Marines all his career, joined in 99. He left last year. He was a colonel, as you say. He had actually been selected for promotion to brigadier, but he didn't take up that brigadier's appointment, or he never held the rank, because he resigned and very rapidly became a Labour MP for Birmingham Sellyoak. So he was made MP on, was it the 4th of July or the 5th, something like that. But 5 days later, he was Minister for Veterans. It was an absolutely meteoric rise, and that was last July. This September, he's now been made MINAF, Minister for the Armed Forces, which is basically all the exciting bits of the MOD. So the Defence Secretary, who's Al's boss, has the whole, literally the whole shooting match, but he's also got to do pensions and no smoking policy and all that kind of boring stuff. So Al just has the fighty bit. All he has to do is stare at the enemy and work out how best to kill them. That's what MINAF does. So he gets the interesting and exciting bits of the MOD without all the sort of, future policy and space-based health and safety and all that kind of stuff. So he's got a really good job. And I think his sort of meteoric rise through the ranks is because of his background. Labour, I think, were looking for looking for somebody who knew their stuff, looking for somebody to spike the guns of the Tory party. You don't get much more credibility on defence by having a roughy tufty Royal Marine as one of your front benchers. So he's sort of come very new to politics. The question is, of course, whether or not he's had no time at all to cut his teeth as a constituency MP, and that's what's going to unseat you if you get that bit wrong. So he might be a superb minister. We don't yet know, but he might be a brilliant minister who's got lots of experience. But if his constituents don't like him, or say, well, you're not actually paying any attention to us, and when you do, you don't know one end of the surgery from the other, then he could easily be out whenever the next election comes. So he's got a lot on his plate as wee Al, and he's certainly not wee. He's about 6'8", for God's sake.
And you mentioned his roughy tufty Royal Marines background. Where's he served?
Well, he's got 2 gallantry awards from Afghanistan. He won the DSO, the Distinguished Service Order, which basically is for outstanding leadership in an operational area. He's been mentioned in dispatches in Afghanistan. He's won the Military Cross in Afghanistan. He's been around a bit. He's shown his worth. Earlier this year, he climbed Everest with a team of former Special Forces chaps, and they did it using some new, not quite experimental, but not found on every corner shop type thing, gas. so that you could better acclimatise, because he said he didn't have time to climb Everest in the normal time it would take mere mortals like you and me, Venetia. So he had to use this super duper gas so he could just get up and down in about 5 days before anyone knew he was missing from the Palace of Westminster. So I mean, that's the kind of character we're dealing with here.
What did you make of him?
So I didn't have a huge amount of time in his company. The interview was an hour, which is a good long interview, but it's taken so long to set it up. This government, even more so than the last one, and the Tories weren't brilliant at giving us access to ministers and senior officers in the military. But this government has been particularly bad about providing access for journalists, which is all part of that pesky old democracy stuff, or that this transparency and access to see what's being done in our name with our money kind of thing. Of course, there are lines beyond which we can't go, secret stuff and what have you. But the public does have a right to be informed about all this. So this interview with Al Carns has taken so long to set up. It's taken 8 months. So he was Minister for Veterans when I first put the request in and was following it through and trying to tick it. And in the meantime, he's been promoted. I mean, it turns into an even better interview than it may otherwise have been, or better billing anyway. I'll let you be the judge of whether or not it's a good interview. I found him engaging. I found him keen to answer, because it's been so long without being able to hold senior MOD figures to account or to interview them. I had so many questions across so many different topics that it was a slightly schizophrenic interview, as you will hear. I couldn't really dig into any great depth into any issues. I had to just sort of zap him with the headline that I was going in with to a topic with, and then there were time maybe for 2 or 3 follow-ups, and that was about it. Then I had to dash off elsewhere. So, I wouldn't say I got him on the ropes, because I just didn't really have time to pick apart some of the arguments. I mean, some of the areas we spoke about, we disagreed on, as you'll hear. There were some areas where we had a bit of back and forth. He didn't put any limits on the interview, and they don't normally. To be fair, officials don't. It's often their staff, slightly overzealous, sometimes say, "Can you give us a list of questions that you're going to ask?" To which I politely reply, "No." Or they might say, "What topic is you going to be asking about?" And I'll say, "Well, probably, Ukraine and war." I go out of my way to be. When I was a second lieutenant, I was described as obstreperous, which even I had to go and look it up. Boisterously resisting control, apparently. So I channel my inner second lieutenant obstreperous nature when I'm asked questions from MOD officials about what questions you're going to be asking the minister. And I say, well, what questions would you like me to ask the minister? And just sort of go back and forth about that. So anyway, a long-winded way of saying that there's a lot in there. It's a heavy diet of red meat. But Al Carns didn't even attempt to direct it anywhere or shut anything down. He was very happy to talk about anything at all. So that fair play. Not every government official does that. So yeah, he was open in that regard. So I look forward to interviewing him again and perhaps holding his feet to the fire with some of the issues that we just didn't really have time to dig into, money especially, and MOD budgets, the equipment plan, and what have you. He said a few interesting things, which I was able to sort of have a quick follow-up, quick supplemental question, but I just couldn't really dig down to the detail that I would want to. Ajax as well. Ajax was a goodie. He used the word cancel. He asked the question, should we cancel Ajax? I felt to say, well, mate, are you interviewing me? Because I'd say yes. But anyway, so he did approach that. He didn't then say yes or no, but he said that it would he wouldn't shy away from it, which I guess is an easy thing for politicians to say. But at least he raised the prospect of cancelling Ajax, which is a 6.3 billion. What do we call it? A troubled program. When you hear troubled rock star, normally means that they're in the Priory or something. You have a troubled program in the MOD. It means literally the wheels are about to fall off, which is kind of where we are with Ajax. Anything else that surprised you from the interview? Nothing really surprised me. I mean, he's shaved his beard off. He's got this sort of nice. He's a big guy. He's got this sort of short, very sort of snow white hair. He's got a granite jaw. He comes from Aberdeen, so unsurprisingly, he's got a granite jawline. But he has been sporting a tufty little beard of late. He was looking like an angry Santa, but he got rid of the beard, which, I mean, I saw some comments online. It was going down very well, so I was slightly surprised he got rid of that. Maybe Mrs. Carns has told him which way his mint pie is brandy buttered. But no, nothing particularly surprised me. I suppose if I had to go out on a limb, I was slightly surprised at how open he was. Some of his comments about reform, as in the party reform, and Nigel Farage in the wake of Nathan Gill, the former Reform leader in Wales, being sentenced to 10.5 years in prison for
taking bribes to make statements in favour of Russia.
So he was quite pointed, not only in his criticism of Nathan Gill, but also of Reform Party and also Nigel Farage. So I was a tad surprised at that. And then on reflection, I'm wondering if this is why he, or one of the reasons he is where he is. Maybe Labour see that flank, that sort of reform-facing flank, as slightly vulnerable, and they need an attack dog to go in on that, because he certainly did. That would not. I don't think that would be an unfair characterisation of his comments about reform. Perhaps slightly surprised that the interview was as long as it was, but maybe that was because MOD felt guilty about keeping me waiting for 8 months.
Great, thanks very much, Dom.
Carns, Labour MP for Birmingham Selly since July 2024, now Minister of State for the Armed Forces. Pretty meteoric rise, entered politics last year. 18 months later, already on your second ministerial appointment. Head spinning?
Yeah, it's been busy, but after 24 years in the military and quite a big chunk working both in this department and in and out of the political military space, the ministerial piece is actually moving forward at a good speed and heading in the right direction. Catching up on the MP bit and the constituency bit and making sure it all ties together, that's quite difficult, but nevertheless, I'm always up for a challenge.
Well, I'm going to focus on your current role, if I may. Minister of State for the Armed Forces, the second in command, if you like, of the MOD. So whilst your boss, Defence Secretary John Healey, has the whole range of defence work, including pensions and policy on smoking and all the rest of it, you just get the interesting fighty bit. That's the best job. Now, Finnish President Alexander Stubb said yesterday that the prospect of peace in Ukraine is at its closest point now than it has been since the start of the full-scale invasion in February 2022. President Zelensky said yesterday he'd be willing to have elections in the next 3 months if his allies and friends could provide security for that. Do you think the United Kingdom, along with other friends in Europe and perhaps Canada or Australia, could they provide the force for that election monitoring and security purpose, or does it have to include the United States?
So I don't think it's about election monitoring. I think it's about security guarantees. So the first thing is to ensure that Ukraine is the very centre of these negotiations. It's their decision on what peace looks like and what it feels like. What we as the international community need to do and what the UK has led on is the coalition of the willing. So how do we provide those security guarantees to ensure that peace is sustained and that we can reassure the Ukrainian population that the West is behind them?
Now, for the first time yesterday, I heard President Zelensky talk about this emerging potential peace proposal having 3 distinct elements. And one of it was the security guarantees, but he split it out. He said there were security guarantees and security arrangements, and said the coalition of the willing was in the latter, in the security arrangement. So can you just talk us through this? What is the difference between a security guarantee and the security arrangements that the coalition of the willing might be able to provide?
I'll need to look into the specifics around the wording. The coalition of the willing is about safe skies, safe seas and secure borders, and helping the Ukrainians rebuild their military capacity and capabilities as an effective deterrent. I would argue that security guarantees are what we've been talking with the Americans about, ensuring that there is a backstop, that, should there be a continuation of violence, that it can be deterred effectively.
I mean, when we're talking about security guarantees, there's only one show in town, isn't there? Article 5. Anything less than that is not a guarantee.
It depends, I guess. I mean, Article 5 is obviously a security guarantee, but also a US backstop is a security guarantee. There's also a bit, when we look statistically, we often underplay this, that collectively in Europe, if we combined our capability and capacity, I mean, it is significant. Take the standing forces across Europe and it dwarfs that of Russia. Take the standing tank armies, take the standing attack aviation, take the standing fast jets, and even without the US, it dwarfs Russia. So, collectively, the coalition of the willing will be pretty capable over time.
And what are we looking at there, as in Britain? Are we looking at a kind of a battle group or brigade, divisional headquarters framework? What sort of role do you envisage yourself?
Yeah, so I'm not going to go into operational detail, but what I will say is between us and the French, we're talking about a joint headquarters that sits within either the UK or in France. And that looks at coordinating and controlling the coalition of the willing that would operate within Ukraine, which would probably have a headquarters and then a multitude of different capabilities around it to provide both security assurance and guarantees over time. But it would need to be both a sufficiently sizable force, but also correctly equipped to fight with the transformation in sort of the character of conflict that we've seen in Ukraine.
And enduring. So you're not going to talk operational detail, but for example, has the British Armed Forces got the capability of putting an armoured brigade in the field indefinitely?
Yeah, so nothing's indefinite. And
5 years.
Remember, these rotations would take place. I can't imagine that it would just be the UK. Of course, you can have 30 plus other countries, and that would enjoy a rotational period to share the burden. I have no doubt that if the UK is called upon to act, that we have the capability and the capacity to do so. And you know what it's like. You've served in Afghanistan, and when there's an operational necessity, guess what? All the bureaucracy falls away and stuff happens really, really fast, and the military sort of carve through all of that bureaucracy and process and make it happen. So I have no doubt for the briefs I've had that we can deliver.
Now, it's a lovely winter's day here in London. The sun is shining, blue sky. It's a bit nippy outside, beautiful winter's day. Doesn't feel, as the US national security strategy might have it, that we are close to civilizational erasure. Are we?
No, I disagree wholeheartedly. I think the UK is actually a fantastic example of a European nation and a UK independent nation. It will be for as long as democracy exists. And I don't think that's under threat in any way, shape or form. I think there's lots of people internally and externally that play the UK down. From my perspective, we should be really proud of our nation. I think it's unified and it's heading in the right direction.
So how much of the national security strategy do you disagree with, as you say? So Russia welcomed the document last week, calling it largely consistent with Moscow's vision. Do you welcome that? And how much of the paper do you disagree with?
I was actually at the Reagan conference just last weekend and heard Secretary Hegseth give almost an hour speech on the national security strategy. Everybody will take different views from it, whether that be in Southeast Asia to Russia to Europe. There is one clear message, and I actually agree with a proportion of it, of where Europe needs to collectively acknowledge and own a large proportion of its own security. For the last 50 to 60 years, we have been reliant on US security guarantees of our own. And now with multipolar threats facing the US, that they may not be as forthright as they have in the past. The reality is Trump has agreed that he's fully in on NATO and Article 5, but there is a resource issue where they need to look both east and west.
You mentioned Secretary Hegseth there. Secretary of Defence, Secretary of War, what are we calling?
Well, we are Defence, Department of Defence, Ministry of Defence, the Secretary of War. It's up to the US, what they call their organisation. It's down to them. Remember, these things come and go. Let's look forward 5 years and see whether it'll be, see what the name will be, see what the output will be, see what the NSS looks like. These things ebb and flow with political cycles.
Now, you are, quote, the most extraordinary man and would be the most impressive leader this country has ever had, unquote, according to one source speaking to Politics Home recently. How do you feel about your name being touted as a possible future Labour leader?
Yeah, so from my perspective, you've got to follow before you can lead. I've been in politics for a year and a half. My job is to get my job done, focus on my portfolio, which is operations and policy during this very fragile geostrategic moment in time, and support the Prime Minister to deliver his aims. So, I wouldn't believe everything you read in the news. There's lots of myths and lies and, false information that goes around there, and that's been one of them.
Yeah, I mean, you say you got the job first. You've been in the job 18 months, as I said at the start, but you're already on your second ministerial position. I mean, that momentum is quite reasonable. Would you say your political ambition tops out at the MOD?
No, I'd say I want to deliver change. That's the reason I got into this game in the first place. That's why I left the military, to deliver change, both make us most safe and secure country, but also make sure this country is, what we would want it to be, which is the best in Europe and one of the best countries in the world, which I believe it is. There's a lot of people at the moment playing down this country, sowing division, quite angry, quite aggressive. It's like, this country is amazing. There's lots of talk about migration, for example. Yes, we need to get it under control. We've got to deal with that. But there's also a little bit of where we should be deeply proud that lots of people want to come to this country because it's so amazing. And we're just going to make sure it's controlled and in the right manner.
You say a lot of people are sowing division. Do you think reform own the patriotism debate at the moment?
Absolutely not. I mean, this individual in reform just got 10.5 years in prison for taking money from Russia. It's absolutely bananas.
I mean, they've denounced him.
Well done. He was part of their party. I mean, 10.5 years in prison, taking money from a hostile state that has resulted in 1,000 casualties a day and 1 million casualties in Russia.
So do you see that as
economic impact for the whole of Europe? Russia is, in cyberspace and the influence space, is seeking to divide us to Europe, us to the US. And then we find, and I think, I mentioned this the other day on the news, I think reform should run an internal investigation because we can't allow other hostile states to meddle in UK politics as a democracy.
But seriously, I mean, do you seriously think Nigel Farage is a small a Russian agent? Do you think he actually promotes...
No, that's not what I said, but let's face facts.
Well, I'm not asking you if you think that.
But let's just face facts. Reform. How many times has Nigel Farage been on Russian Times? How many times has he spoke on Russian media? You might want to have a look into that. The second bit is, when this conflict started, who did he blame for it? Talk about geostrategic risk. This is a time for serious politics, serious government, a serious time of almost crisis across Europe and the world. And we're talking up an individual who was on Russia Times and blamed NATO for Russians' illegal invasion into Ukraine that saw women and children in cities being attacked in a Western European nation on the edge of Europe that has now got 10,000 North Korean troops fighting on the border.
You say he's not a serious politician, but he's eclipsing you in the polls at the moment. What do you say to people who are thinking about voting for reform? You're saying they're misguided.
This is about a serious politician that understands the geostrategic situation that we are in. Where are they on defence questions? Have a look in the House. Where are they? They're never there. Where are they on these issues? Never there. This is a really important time in history, and I like serious individuals who understand the geopolitical situations that we sit in, and of course, the domestic issues which those geostrategic issues impact. You've got to have your eye on both.
Now, talking about serious people in defence, General Sir Gwyn Jenkins, the first Sea Lord, the first Royal Marine in that post. Royal Marines are part of the Navy. He delivered a rallying cry on Monday this week for industry, MPs and society to ensure Britain is war ready, saying that in relation to the threat from Russia, quote, "We are holding on, but not by much. This is a call for action. We are moving out because we have no choice. The alternative is not worth thinking about." Was that a bit over the top?
Well, the alternative that's not worth thinking about is that if we don't support Ukraine to come to an amenable peace that Ukraine is at the very centre of, then the cost may be far more significant if Ukraine were to lose. And so I think he's absolutely right on that. And I think Europe has absolutely acknowledged it. And if you look at the funding and support to Ukraine, it's gone up consistently. There's this mix of industry, sort of society and economy that is critical to defence. And I always say that armies, navies and air forces respond to crisis, but economies, industries and societies win wars. And I gave a speech just at the Future Forum yesterday that talked about a national effort. So other government departments recognising the situation we're in and how we can collectively support national resilience in particular.
If there's time, I'd like to talk to you about NATO Article 3 and national resilience later, but I will come back to that. I'm just sticking with the Navy for a moment. We've just lost HMS Lancaster without a replacement of frigate. Type 26 is coming on track. Should we expect the third hull, provisionally named HMS Belfast, to be the first ship that we send to Norway, as they've now joined the Type 26 programme?
I don't necessarily understand the specifics on that because that sits within Minister for Defence, Resilience and Procurement. What I would say is the Type 26 is a fantastic platform that we've now got multiple different nations to purchase. Why is that important? Because particularly in the North Atlantic, whether it be Canada, whether it be Norway, whether it be us, whether it be the Australians, having interoperable capability that has the same types of systems, the same types of equipment support is absolutely essential today. Ukraine is a microcosm of this, actually. If you look at it, the different type of systems that they've been gifted is a smorgasbord of defence capability, which means the equipment supply chain is exceptionally complex. So minimising the different amount of platforms, making sure that we in the North Atlantic have the same types of frigates with the same types of systems is hugely beneficial. It's a massive step forward.
Now, talking about interoperable capabilities, and let's raise our eyes to the sky, the government said in June the UK will purchase 12 new F-35A fighter jets and join NATO's dual-capable aircraft nuclear mission in a major boost for national security. Is it possible to join the dual-capable aircraft nuclear mission without air-delivered nuclear weapons? Has the United States said yes, that we can use the B-61?
So again, I'm not going to talk about discussions that are taken between us and the US, but if you've got an aircraft that is capable of carrying a type of munition, then that provides strategic complexity and risk to our adversaries. And that's part of this plan, which is broadening our delivery capability for those types of systems, which, if you can imagine, sat in other states looking at that, it gives us great flexibility, which I think is a good thing.
So down the line, do you think it would be an idea for Britain to try and develop the B-61 type variant, the free-for-all nuclear bomb, air-delivered again, or are we relying on that being there? Should we ever need to use it?
I'm not going to talk about nuclear capability in particular. What I would say is that aircraft is capable in many ways of both carrying and delivering that type of system, and that provides dilemmas to our adversaries.
Now, on the ground, Chief of the General Staff, head of the Army, said his ambition is to double Army combat power by 2027 and then double it again by 2030. What's the measurement of effectiveness for doubling combat power?
I would say that the character conflict has demonstrated to us in Ukraine that the inject of autonomous and, well, less so autonomous, but in particular uncrewed systems can increase your combat power and lethality significantly if you adopt them, and you adopt them properly. For example, 22 artillery rounds now equates to 1, if not 2, FPV drones in lethality and accuracy. And so there's a division of effort here of how we take our lessons from Ukraine, the character conflict, and buy them into the army to increase our lethality, in particular in the uncrewed space.
Don't you think it's a bit of a hostage to fortune, though, putting numbers on it, saying we're going to double it by and certain years? You then just get pesky journalists saying, well, go on, then how many tanks have you got? How many X, Y, and Z?
Pesky journalists are pesky journalists, but the reality is by setting quite an ambitious target, it drives the whole system to deliver it. And this is part of leadership, isn't it? You set a stretch target and it pushes the system to move there as fast as possible. If you were to turn around and say, hey, well, one, how are you going to measure it? Secondly, if you were to set your sights lower, guess what? The system slows down, because you're not putting it under pressure. So I fully support General Rowley's sort of drive for lethality. And let's face it, in the past, in wars of choice, we've outsourced our lethality to others. You look at lethality in the Navy, in the Army or the Air Force, we've often outsourced it. We've got to make sure that we increase our lethality and kinetic effect across all of our single services.
To whom have we outsourced it?
Well, in the past, we've outsourced it to the US. You've served in Afghanistan. We have outsourced it, especially when we're talking long-range fires as well. So the Army's buying back into this now under General Rowley's leadership. It's going to enhance it. And I think we've got some great announcements coming up next couple of months. I'm whole set on uncrewed systems, which is another form of fires. We just need to integrate that into the way we fight. And we've got to learn the lessons from Ukraine, because I think it's, uncrewed systems are here to stay.
It's interesting you say that, because a lot of the messaging from Donald Trump, J.D. Vance, Pete Hegseth is Europe. You've been riding our coattails in defence for a long time. You've been using us as a security umbrella. Do you think Europe, and the UK in particular, need to do that sort of hands up moment? Yeah, you're right. We were taking you for granted for too long. Now let's do something about it. Do you think we need to, and have we done that?
Well, I think they have. I mean, looking at the media over the last 2 years, I think we've turned around and collectively as Europe, and particularly within the UK, said, hey, we need to up our game on defence spending. And that's what the government has done. We've upped our game. The strategic defence review's out. We're moving out on a lot of this stuff now. And it takes a bit of time, but we're moving on it. The big bit on this is defence industry. Look at defence industry spending across Europe. It's gone up, and it's going up, and it's continued to go up for the foreseeable future. And that's really where the heart of defence sits: your ability to design, build, and then deliver complex or simple systems that increase your kinetic activity.
Now, talking about designing, building and delivering complex capability, let's talk about the Ajax-shaped elephant in the room. Your colleague, Defence Minister Luke Pollard, told Parliament recently that the Ministry of Defence declared initial operating capability on Ajax in November, only after receiving written assurances from senior Army officials and acquisition personnel that the vehicle was demonstrably safe. People have been injured since then through noise and vibration. Do you think it's fair that he might feel a little bit let down by the advice he was given?
Well, the first thing is, one, we've got to make sure our people are safe. I don't know how long you spent in armoured vehicles. I've never been in armoured infantry, but I spent a bit of time. And 16 hours in an armoured vehicle, it's pretty miserable at the best of times. From my perspective, this project has been running now for 15, 16 years. It's been overspent. The money has ebbed and flowed over that time. The KURs, the key user requirements, have gone through the roof. They've ebbed and flowed to the point of where it's caused real strain on the company and our ability to deliver. As Luke Pollard has said, he's going to review it. And when the review is done, we will systematically enforce any recommendations. And if that's to continue the vehicle and make sure it comes online in the right standard, then so be it. But I've got to leave that down to the experts to do the proper analysis as to rid of the rumours, and let's focus on the facts, the honest facts of where this project has failed and where it's succeeded, and then move forward from there.
Well, the honest fact was that Mr. Pollard was given an assurance by senior army officials and acquisition personnel that it was safe. So I say again, do you think it's fair that he might feel a little bit let down by that advice?
Yeah, I can agree that he can feel let down. But what he has done is acted almost immediately and put a review in place. That review will go down into the root and branch of this project, and then pick out where we need to improve the system, whether we need to deliver it, and then hold people account if they need to.
The defence procurement system is often criticised for being bloated and over time, over cost, etc., etc., etc. Do you think it needs a scruff of the neck moment, a proper shake, a proper we've got to do better, and cancelling a major project such as Ajax, £6 billion in the hole? Do you think that would be the wake-up call the defence procurement process needs?
So I've always said procurement needs a shake. I've always been clear on that. The system is too bureaucratic, it's too slow, and technology is overtaking it in the civilian space left and right. And so we've got to review it. That's why National Armament Director, I don't know if you met him, I'd suggest you have an interview with him. He's fantastic, and he's moving forward change at a rapid pace. He's from that space. He understands it. He's a domain expert, which is critical. Cancelling Ajax, let's let the review come out with what it says, come out with the facts and the figures, and then we'll make a political and military decision on the back of that review. To say that now would be disingenuous to either the programme or indeed the soldiers that are having to use it.
And when should we expect that review to?
That's a great question. I'll need to get back to you with a date.
Now, defence spending at the moment is about 2.32% of GDP. You've committed to increasing that by 0.18 by 2027. That's been hailed as a massive increase. Accurate figures are hard to come by. The MOD has not published a budgeted equipment plan since November 2022. Interesting. But the Public Accounts Committee and the National Audit Office put the black hole in the 10-year defence equipment plan at £17 billion. So how big would you say the black hole is, and how much will go on filling it through that 0.18% increase by 2027, as opposed to spending on new things?
Let's go right back. So we're the first government to up defence spending to this level since the Cold War. So let's just put that line in the sand. The consistent criticism from other sides of the House when they dithered around defence spending is unacceptable. When you come in and you open up your portfolio and you have a look at some of the projects and programmes that have overspent, overrun, and have a variety of issues with them, you are literally left with a basket case. And so the Strategic Defence Review was to reaffirm, refocus our priorities, and that a defence investment plan is to deliver the capability to deliver the Strategic Defence Review's recommendations. That defence investment plan will come out in due course. That defence investment plan will set out where that spending is going to go.
But how big do you think that the black hole is, the 10-year black hole in EP?
Well, I think across the equipment programme, there's a whole plethora of different capabilities that Ukraine has taught us that we may not necessarily need anymore. And there are other programs that have, been grossly overspent, or we've changed our key user requirements to such an extent because technology has changed, have skewed the whole program out of shape. The defence investment plan will cut those away and focus on what we really need to.
So just to be clear, when we're talking about a black hole, that's future planned spending. So you're suggesting that some programs that are currently in train might be cancelled?
Well, no, just remember that those future programs were programs that were often put in place 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago. And so we've taken on the portfolio, looked at it and gone, hold on a second. We're watching a war in Ukraine where the character of conflict has changed. Capabilities have been proven less useful or more useful than previously. We need to switch some of that. So there'll be some decisions in the defence investment plan which will be difficult but necessary to make changes, to make sure our force is ready to fight any future war. And hey, I'm not going to shy away from any difficult decisions. I'll just face up. The reality is people's lives on the line. If we don't get this right, there's a crisis that brews over into a conflict. We need to be ready. And you know that.
Now, talking about lives on the line, switch tack slightly, if I may, go to Afghanistan. The Afghanistan inquiry is ongoing at the moment. I'm not going to ask you to comment on it because it is an ongoing inquiry. But how content are you that the moral compass of the UK Special Forces Group is strong and pointed in the right direction?
100%, without a doubt.
What are your views on the inquiry so far and some of the evidence that's come out, particularly in the last couple of weeks?
I have complete faith in the very tip of the spear. They are some of the crown jewels of our organisation. We've got to ensure that, of course, we abide by the law like everyone else. I'm not going to ever shy away from that. And I have 100% faith in our Special Forces capability.
Now, in May 1987, 8 armed terrorists were killed by the SAS when the IRA attempted to commit mass murder by driving a digger loaded with explosives into a remote police station in Loughgall, Northern Ireland. That incident has been investigated more than once in the nearly 40 years since. Do you think there should be a new inquest?
Well, it's not a new inquest, it's an ongoing inquest. It was opened by the Conservative Party in 2014.
Do you think it should continue?
So the Northern Ireland office has been really clear that the ongoing inquests will be reopened. We've been clear with that. So there's 7 inquests that will be reopened. I'm working exceptionally hard to ensure that protections are in place. And, if it continues, it takes up a large chunk of my portfolio above and beyond everything else, to make sure those protections are absolutely solidly written into legislation, so there's no ability for people to use the process as a punishment or rewrite history through the courts.
Hilary Benn, who's Secretary of State for Northern Ireland, he said that the new Northern Ireland Troubles Act will help, in his words, help those families who lost loved ones in the Troubles, including relatives of the families of British service people who did not come home, to find the answers they have long been seeking. Do you think the IRA or Sinn Féin will ever provide information to the detail and at the scale which the MOD and other government departments are able to?
You're absolutely right in some cases. So the military kept facts, kept files and details on all the cases. The IRA, of course, didn't. But you also bring up a really valid point that very few of the families of lost service personnel, which the majority of cases that sit within the Legacy Commission sit around those families, were really angry with the last Legacy Act that gave everybody, immunity. They never get a voice. There's hundreds of them, and they want to get to the truth. The Legacy Commission has the best powers, the most effective powers to get to the truth. Some of the relationships with the Republic of Ireland will hopefully bring new evidence. Let's wait and see. Let's test and adjust. And let's continue to watch this process. From my perspective, there's three groups of people. The first one are veterans. We've got to accept that 90% of all casualties in Northern Ireland were caused by terrorists. There is the families of security personnel that were lost, or indeed innocent bystanders. And then there are families of individuals who were killed by the security forces. And you've got to, in some cases, make sure that truth and reconciliation happens for all of them. You know Northern Ireland politics better than I, probably. And it's very difficult to get those 3 circles to overlap. But there is a little space in the middle where we can move towards reconciliation and truth. It mustn't be at the cost of veterans here in the UK. And I've got their back when fighting for it within the MOD, but we've got to accept that the legislation sits in the NIO.
Would you have supported the letters of comfort to IRA members, the policy of the Blair government at the time?
I would have supported letters of comfort to everyone.
The point I'm making is that really difficult decisions are taken to end very, very complex. So is now the time when another really difficult...
So I've spoken to cases after case after case on letters of comfort. Letters of comforts have no legal standing at all. And people keep pulling up one case, which it was actually to do with abuse process. It wasn't to do with a letter of comfort that allowed that case to collapse. But the moral and broader implications of giving one group letters of comfort, because no one really thought that lawfare would so long after this issue. No one even, and I've spoken to people in the Good Friday who were at the centre of the Good Friday agreement, no one sort of accepted that or acknowledged that this would happen. And I think in hindsight, we were probably giving letters of comfort to everyone.
I mean, hindsight is the only 100% intelligence report. So the point is that the difficult decisions taken at the time can have massive ramifications later on. So perhaps this bill that's running through at the moment that your government is supporting could well be laying the seeds for more trouble 2 or 3 decades down the line. Do you think it's not time now to say we're never really going to get to the absolute truth of every single incident? We as a society in Northern Ireland, we've just got to move on.
So the Last Immunity Act was illegal. Every political party hated the Last Immunity Act in Northern Ireland.
Doesn't that mean it's probably in the right place then?
Well, I mean, as I said, Northern Ireland politics better than I. But the reality is it was illegal. And so it was a false promise that was always going to be picked away by the courts. We've had the difficult decision of having to, and the NIO have led on this, of having to try and sort out that Legacy Act to make sure it's legal, fit for purpose, and squares those 3 circles. It's a very difficult thing to do. My sole focus on this, and I'm going to be really honest, the sole focus is to ensure veterans get the protections they require and the families of lost loved ones get truth and reconciliation where they can. And the best way to do that is in a Legacy Commission. And that's me working collaboratively with the NIO, John Healy and others to make sure that veterans' voices are absolutely heard in the centre. And I've been pushing really hard to ensure that the veterans that are championing this so hard do it in a focused and balanced manner to deliver the changes that are legally applicable.
Sticking with Northern Ireland, the release yesterday of the 164-page report into activities of Stakeknife, Britain's top agent inside the IRA, says he was implicated in 14 murders whilst being shielded by security service. Now, regardless of any intelligence that might be gained, where do you say the line is beyond which the authorities should cease contact with an agent?
Well, when they break the law.
How much of the law, though? Ken McCullen, the head of MI5, is on the record saying now, today, murder, no. Serious violence, no. But a parking fine is, so where's the line? Is okay to allow an agent to continue to operate?
We break the law. I mean, my perspective from this is actually around Stakeknife as an individual, is that our intelligence agencies are some of the best in the world. And they have networks within networks and networks. The impact, if you release details, even if it was 20, 30 years ago, people who have worked to protect freedom and democracy around the world will ripple across all of that network and put them off helping us. So some things need to stay, within the non-disclosure space.
So do you welcome the fact that the individual known as Stakeknife, who has still not been publicly acknowledged by the government, implicated in 14 murders, is that a price to pay for peace?
Well, I don't really agree with the question. The price to pay for peace. I mean, how instrumental was Stakeknife in delivering peace? And so, I will stick to the line that I don't agree with anyone that breaks the law. Actually, whether it be rules of engagement or the military's use of capability, there are enough freedoms there to deliver what is required to fight for and deliver the peace. In Northern Ireland, our military and intelligence services were deployed to protect the civilian population and to deliver peace, and they did that. I mean, the reality is the IRA were defeated militarily, and through the intelligence space, they were defeated and brought to the political process. That's a huge success. And all the veterans that served, I served in Northern Ireland, it was way after the Troubles in 2002, should be really proud of the service. 300,000 people served in Northern Ireland. I think it's a great thing. People should be really proud of what they delivered. Look at Northern Ireland now. You know this as well as I. Go back 15, 20 years, there were bombs going off in the mainland from Brighton to Birmingham almost every day. Close quarter assassinations. People in politics had to check under their car and make sure there's, and this is something the House needs to remember. Every MP was arguably a target. You can walk around in military uniform. There's a reason the military's disconnected with society. One of that reasons is because of the IRA, the threat was so high that you had to hide you were in the military in the first place. But the military succeeded in Northern Ireland. That's the reality.
Let's talk about society for a moment. We touched on it earlier on. We talked about NATO's Article 5, the Mutual Defence Clause, but often overlooked is NATO Article 3. Which requires that countries ensure their resilience to attack. Now, the Defence Committee report that came out recently said the UK lacks a plan for defending the homeland and overseas territories with little progress on the Home Defence Programme. They said the Prime Minister's National Conversation on Defence and Security, highlighted in the Strategic Defence Review, is yet to start. When do you see that conversation starting? And do you think that we are doing enough under our Article 3 obligations?
So the whole of society approach was, as you saw, had a whole chapter within the Strategic Defence Review. And that's about ensuring the rest of government departments work with defence to ensure that resilience is front and centre as we move forward. Interestingly, my last job in the veterans and people role, we launched Up Valour. Up Valour was about better support to veterans, but it was actually also about ensuring that we've got the data on our veterans networks. So if there was a crisis, we could call those individuals back to serve or support the nation should they need to do so. There's broader plans within the Cabinet Office at the moment looking at national resilience and plans should an Article 3 or indeed should a crisis reach our shores. So I actually think this government is, from the SDR to the broader government analysis and some of the PM's comments on this, say it's not just an armed forces responsibility to look at resilience. It's a whole of society requirement, from education to industry through to our national services.
One thing that surprised me, though, now I stare at this stuff every day, but I can see a very clear line from what Vladimir Putin is doing in Ukraine through to some of the problems we have here every day in the United Kingdom, the cost of living and the prices going up, inflation, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And yet that argument is not, that golden thread is not being made by the government. I can't point to a speech by the Prime Minister where he's directly linked what's happening in Ukraine and what's happening in Russia and the wider societal challenges to the post-Second World War order having an impact today to the men and women and children of the United Kingdom. So why is that? It seems such a gift for the government to be able to make that argument. And if we are serious about the threat that's coming down the tracks to us, why is that not being made clearer?
So we need to accept that issues, crisis and conflict away from our shores absolutely directly impacts us here. A small example, Jaguar Land Rover, irrelevant of where it came from, 1.5 billion bailout is half the 2-child benefit cap. The biggest impact on cost of living at the start of the conflict, an energy spike and food prices rise, was the conflict in Ukraine. The biggest impact of the Ukraine war was plunging millions of people into poverty throughout Africa because of the increase in grain prices, which spiked across the whole world. we've got to ensure people acknowledge that and understand the impacts back here in the UK. So I'm completely with you. I think we need to make more of a collective effort to message that and impact it. And I always say, someone is doing the dishes at home and they listen to the radio. How do they actually tune in and accept that the war in Ukraine is the biggest impact on our way of living here in the UK and why it should be the most important thing that we're dealing with?
Now, the Strategic Defence Review recommended additional capabilities for the protection of bases and critical national infrastructure. The MOD has been directed to explore the development of a new home defence force led by the Army, we're told, possibly organised under the Reserve Forces structure. Now, some in the media, when this was announced, unfairly characterised the new Home Guard as a sort of dad's army type thing. You will never get that kind of characterisation in the Telegraph, perish the thought. But how's that going? How's the possible Reserve Forces structure and the new Home Guard going?
So the whole society approach is what I just talked about. That looks at two things. One, the strategic reserve. So individuals that have served and left the military, they still have a duty on recall. And then secondly, we need to create some sort of broader service that can protect our critical national infrastructure and respond at the time of crisis. That's within the Strategic Defence Review. There's a recommendation there for delivery over the next couple of years, i.e. the programme that's going to push this out, and that's being worked on now by the department. The reality is what we need to do. We need to accept that if there is a crisis, we will require more people to contribute to the state rather than the sort of state supporting them, and make sure that we have a whole of society response to a crisis. So it's moving in the right direction. All of the SDR is moving out. We've already, and as you'll see tomorrow, there's a couple of recommendations already been hit, and we're going to keep knocking them off as we move forward.
This Home Guard force, whatever it's going to be called, could that be where the 1.5% of defence-related spending commitments goes by 2035?
So I think there's a real opportunity with the 1.5% for a whole plethora of different capabilities to benefit from it. And
such as?
I primarily mean this from, for example, where defence can support broader social mobility, whether that be the cadets, whether that be home defence, whether that be resilience across our critical national infrastructure. There's a whole plethora of different capabilities that can benefit from it. But I particularly think that defence provides an amazing opportunity for allowing people to realise their ambitions, provide a bit more boundaries and structures to young people's lives.
Minister, how is the announcement today going to further national resilience in the country?
Hey, this is about, from my perspective, for too long, people haven't recognised that the military threats that we face on an international basis, if they materialise, can have the biggest impact to the UK, our citizens and our way of life. And so the announcement that we've just made is about the Military Intelligence Service, which is a rebranding and thickening of our defence intelligence, which no one's ever heard about. MI5, Military Intelligence 5, we created it. MI6, Military Intelligence 6. We're now recreating the Military Intelligence Service to thicken out our intelligence capacity and capability and ensure that those threats that are brewing out there are absolutely focused on and dealt with. But secondly, that we can make sure that they are relatable to the population as well. So they really clearly understand some of the impacts that are happening overseas and the second and third order effects they have to the population today.
So how do you relate it to the general public? How do you relate those threats emanating from overseas and bring it right down to the streets here in the UK? How do you make it relevant to...
Well, I think it's about being really honest and pulling the threads through. So at the moment we've had the Antar sailing sort of north of our seas. You've seen it in the news recently.
The Russian spy ship.
Yeah, so if that were to meddle with our critical national infrastructure, we need to make sure that the population know and understand the implications of it. And we in defence and cross-government have dealt with it effectively and have the resilience to be able to absorb, deter or defeat it in the first place. Now, some of that could be lost on your individual sat at home in, for example, Birmingham Selyoak. What's not lost on them is when you turn around and go that we have had 20,000 cyber attacks in the last 2 years, that cyber and industrial espionage is rife. It's costing us millions of pounds every day. The cyber attack on Jaguar Land Rover, well, not attributable at the moment, has cost half of the two-child benefit cap for a year, which is 225,000 children remaining in poverty. That's the harsh reality. And I think we need to make a conscious effort of enabling people to understand what that means in realistic terms, so we can acknowledge that we've got to invest in defence. We've got to make sure defence is this whole of society approach. Everyone knows their role should a crisis, reach our shores.
So what is the mission and the purpose of this new military intelligence service?
Well, the mission of the Military Intelligence Service is to identify and deal with threats that emanate from overseas, defence in particular threats. But one of the aims that I pushed really hard with the Military Intelligence Service is to make sure that the population understand the threats that are out there, within classification, of course, and make it relatable.
Al Carns, Minister of State for the Armed Forces, thanks very much for talking to the Telegraph.
Thank you.
That was Al Carns, Britain's Minister of State for the Armed Forces, talking to our Associate Defence Editor, Dom Nicholls. You can read Dom's profile of Al on the Telegraph's website now, and we'll link to it in the show notes. That's all for today's episode, but before we go, I want to read out a really wonderful email we've had from a listener called Geoffrey in Lancashire, here in Old Blighty. He writes, "Dear Roland, Venetia, Arthur and others, I discovered you shortly after starting to listen to Ukraine the Latest again after a break for a personal battle that I won't bore you with. I wanted to thank you wonderful people for a podcast that I wait on being released and some truly staggering news that I might otherwise miss. I loved that episode on an island off Sweden where you covered a military exercise, Venetia. It was a sensory masterpiece for me. You could hear it all. Please do more like that if you can get access. Also, if you can squeeze more out of global health and security, I would love to hear more from that angle, but definitely not less of the Battle Lines main pod. Please keep up the great work you do. Hearing your feed gives me a bit of clarity in a world I see falling apart around me." Thank you so much, Geoffrey. I wanted to read that out just to thank you in person over this podcast. Emails like that really make our day, our week, our month, our year. If anyone else listening wants to hear that Sweden military exercise episode that he referenced, we'll put a link to that in the show notes. And please do send in your emails if there's stuff you're enjoying, if there's stuff you're not enjoying. We love to hear from you. That's all for today. We'll be back again next week. Until then, goodbye. Battle Lines is an original podcast from The Telegraph, created by David Knowles and hosted by me, Venetia Rainey, and Roland Oliphant. If you appreciated this podcast, please consider following Battle Lines on your preferred podcast app. And if you have a moment, leave a review, as it really helps others find the show. To stay on top of all of our news, subscribe to The Telegraph, sign up to our Dispatches newsletter, or listen to our sister podcast, Ukraine the Latest. You can get in touch directly by emailing battlelines@telegraph.co.uk or contact us on X. You can find our handles in the show notes. The producer is Peter Shevlin. The executive producer is Louisa Wells.